Hello, lovely people. Welcome to my channel. It's Hila here, Saturday Night Stitch. And today we have a Becoming Victorian Part 1 sewing vlog. Basically, my children were having a Victorian day, so I got Simplicity 3725 in order to make them some Victorian costumes. And since they're studying the Victorians, they will get to spend a whole day pretending to be Victorian school kids. So I thought it was a great opportunity to delve into some historical costume sewing, which I've never done before. So I got the pattern, I traced it out, and what I did was I went shopping to charity shops and I found some old bedding, so duvet covers and bed sheets, and that's basically what I decided to use because it does require quite a lot of fabric. The pattern pieces were quite small for the bodice. They're only 8 years old and I traced out the size 8. So a lot of the pattern pieces are rectangular based. So what I did was I just sketched out and took the measurements from the actual pattern sheets so that I had, the rectangular pieces that were going to be the apron belt or the apron or the skirts. And so I was just going to measure those directly onto the duvet covers themselves rather than waste all of that tracing paper by tracing out rectangles. So that's basically what I am doing there. Anyway, so I started off with this black duvet set, which I picked up for £1 at a charity shop. But then later on, I found this really wonderful two-shot taffeta style duvet cover, and it was a double, so there was enough fabric on there for me to use for the dresses themselves. So I went and I just had to start cutting again because it had this really lovely border with some tucking details, which I decided was going to make a nice border for the skirt. But I still made use of the black poly cotton one by making a fitting toile, and I was initially going to use that for lining, but eventually I decided to drop the plan for that. So with the duvet cover that I was using, one side had the two-shot taffeta in it and the other side was just a brown cotton. So I got round to sewing and got the bodice and did all of that stuff, which I didn't manage to record because my battery had died and my sewing room is in a bit of a mess. But I did have so much fun doing this. Now, even though these are historical costumes, they do have a zipper at the back. But as you can see there, my sewing room currently is taking over because I've been doing a lot of DIY home renovations. The renovations are quite extensive, and so I've been doing a lot of painting, a lot of stripping down of wallpaper, etc. And everything that's coming out of the rooms that are being done, such as this room, it's all getting put into the area where my sewing cave is, so it's incredibly cluttered at the moment. So that was the second room that I did, and there was another room, so everything is just completely cluttered over. So it was a bit of a miracle in itself that I managed to get all of this done. But I just wanted to give you an idea of how much gathering is actually going into this pattern piece. I used the entire width of the duvet cover, and I think that it came out looking quite nice. So as you can see there along the bottom, that's where I decided to have that trim, and it does create a nice look and feel. So because my sewing cave is currently inaccessible, I had to go back to basics from when I was a baby seamstress and use the dining room table and set myself up there, which I have to say felt really lovely to get back in touch with where I started, because when I started sewing, all I had was a cupboard. Anyway, back to the sewing project. So I cut out some of the trim just so that both of the dresses could have a similar trim at the bottom, because my twins are they're twins obviously, so they tend to find just the one tiny detail that you left out on something, and then that will become the garment or the item that they absolutely must have. So I had to make sure that both dresses had the similar trim at the base. So I took this trim, cut it in half so that it would be enough to go around the hem, and I sewed it to the hem and turned it over and then just top stitched it. I thought that was the quickest way for me to get the job done. By this point, I was up against it because their Victorian Day was the next day. So I had to drop all of my house cleaning schedules, everything else that I was supposed to do to try and get it done. So I had the aprons still to make, the collars to make, and the cuffs. And I was using this white cotton drill fabric that is super thick, super tightly woven, and it was very difficult to sew with. I ended up having to use a heavy duty needle. But once the cuffs were done, which I did ask the girls whether they would be willing to forego the cuffs, but they were like, no, please, can we have the cuffs? So I did try and make sure that I did some rudimentary cuffs. And how I put them in, I did the lazy job here of I lined them up on the inside, sewed them, and then I would just bend them over. And that was just going to be it, because by this point I'd dropped most of my standards of trying to make these costumes look as good as is possible. And now I was just aiming for something that is accurate, close to what I had promised. I think moral of the story there is just don't over promise things. And so I did that with all of them. And as I said, I probably would have finished this a lot quicker if that cotton drill fabric that I used, which has been in my stash now for nearly, I think, 7 years. I don't even remember where I got it from, but it doesn't even press very well either. It's that sort of fabric that was used in those old-fashioned lab coats. So that's one of the dresses done, and then I just had to do another one, and that's the joy of sewing for twins. So I also had to do the collar because the girls really wanted to have the collar. And I must say, I was having so much fun with this historical sewing stuff. The collar itself was quite simple. It's like a Christmas tree skirt. I've made Christmas tree skirts before, where you do sort of like a donut that's been cut out, sew around the edges, leave a little bit to turn it under, press it, and I was putting a hook and eye on them, so they're detachable collars. But apparently my daughters were a bit non-negotiable on this. So the other thing that I didn't record because I was unwell when we did it was that the girls helped with making the bonnets that they wore, which you'll see at the end. And I used the rest of the fabric basically to just create very simple aprons, which gathering this fabric was such a big problem. So basically, I think if you're going to be making a DIY Victorian costume, particularly for the school children, you probably want to pick something quite easy to sew with, like a polycotton or polyester, because this broke so many needles, but we got there in the end. It's really, really thick white fabric, but I think it was worth it for what it looked like. So there's the hook and eye fastening on the collar that I put down so that they can just easily put it on and off. And once it was done, there we are. And so those bonnets, they also used the patterns. This sewing pattern is really fantastic because it's got these different variations. So you can do different eras if you wanted to. And we had such a great time. I will be back with part 2 because I ended up making myself a bonnet for the Victorian trip, which I volunteered. So hopefully I'll be seeing you in that next video. Please do remember to like and subscribe. And until I see you next time, lovelies, happy sewing. Bye.